stepped into the confessional and pulled the curtain shut. Seating himself in the darkness, he began to wait. The confessional was a wooden booth, a very old one, partitioned down the middle to separate the priest and the confessor. In the center of the wall between them was a screened grill that could be opened or closed by a sliding panel on the priest's side. Below the grill was a wooden shelf that ran the length of the partition. Father Azzedi was in the habit of resting his fingertips on this narrow ledge as he inclined his head to hear the whispered confessions. It was clearly a habit that he shared with many priests before him. The little shelf was worn into faint scallops by centuries of pious hands fingering the wood. Father Azzedi sighed, raised the back of his hand to his eyes, and squinted at the luminous dial on his wrist. It was 1:51. On those days when he had not missed breakfast, the priest enjoyed the hours that he spent in the confessional. Like a musician playing Bach, he listened to himself and heard his predecessors in every changing chord. The antique booth was resonant with old heartbreaks, whispered secrets, and absolution. Its walls had listened to 1,000,000 sins, or perhaps, as Father Azzedi thought, to 12 sins committed 1,000,000 times. The priest's musing was interrupted by a familiar noise from the other side of the partition, the sound of a curtain pushed aside, followed by the grunt of an old man sinking to his knees. Father Azzedi composed himself and opened the grill with a brush of his hand. "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned." The man's face was in shadows, but the voice was familiar. It belonged to Monte Castello's most distinguished resident, Dr. Ignazio Baresi. In some ways, Dr. Baresi was like himself, a worldly outsider transplanted to the stifling beauty of the provinces. Inevitably, each man was whispered over, and just as inevitably, they'd become friends. Or, if not friends, then allies, which was as much as the differences in their ages and interests would allow. The truth was, they had little in common beyond too much education. The doctor was a septuagenarian whose walls were crowded with diplomas and certificates attesting to his achievements in science and medicine. The priest was somewhat less distinguished, a middle-aged activist on the back burner of Vatican politics. And so they came together over a chessboard on Friday evenings, sitting in the piazza outside the Café Centrale, sipping Vinsanto. Their conversations were spare and absent any intimacies. A remark about the weather, a toast to one another's health, and then pawn to King's Bishop 4. Even so, after more than a year of idle remarks and occasional reminiscences, they knew one or two things about each other. It seemed enough. Lately, however, the doctor's comings and goings had been less regular. The priest knew that the old man had been ill, but now, listening to him, he realized that Baresi had taken a turn for the worse. His voice was so weak that Father Azzedi had to press his temple to the grill so he could hear. Not that the priest was particularly curious. As with most of those who made their way to his confessional, Azzedi barely needed to listen. After 10 years he knew their weaknesses. At 74, the doctor would have taken the Lord's name in vain. He would have been uncharitable. Before he'd taken ill, he might have lusted after a woman, might even have committed adultery. But all that was over for the poor man, who now seemed weaker by the day. And, in fact, there was an unsavory air of anticipation in the village about the doctor's coming end, an avid expectation from which even Father Azzedi was not entirely free. After all, Il Dottore was a wealthy, pious, and unmarried man. He'd been generous to the town and to the church before. Indeed, Father Azzedi thought, the doctor— What? The priest focused his attention on the doctor's faltering voice. He'd been rambling in the self-justifying way that confessors often did, avoiding the sin while emphasizing his intentions, which were, as always, good. He'd said something about pride, about being blinded by pride, and then there was his illness, of course, and the realization of his own mortality. He'd seen the error of his ways. There was nothing remarkable in that, Azzedi thought. The prospect of death had a way of focusing one's sensibilities, and in particular, one's moral sensibilities. Father Azzedi had been thinking about this when the doctor finally got to the point and began to describe the sin itself, what he'd actually done. The priest listened, and the word burst from him in a gasp.